Thank you for joining us for this session, Demystifying the Process of Poetry. This is a helpful session for folks who are teaching poetry out loud and may not feel entirely comfortable with poetry themselves, or for anyone who wants to get a sense of how to look at a poem more closely. And our speaker is Laura Van Prooyen. She's been an educator for 20 years. She's a poet, and she also is the co-author of Text Structures from Poetry, and has been a participant in the Poetry Out Loud program on behalf of her high school. Thanks so much for doing this, Laura.
Great, thanks for having me. It's nice to see all of you again, and thank you teachers who are here live or those who watch this recording. So thank you so much for being here. This first slide that you see with my contact info, that's just there so that if you print this stuff later, you're like, who was that lady who gave me this? There it is, and you can feel free to email me should you want to in the future. There's my website, which is another way to find me. So that's just there so that I can be available to you for future questions. So this session is really designed for anyone. Maybe you love teaching poetry already. Maybe you are sort of a little nervous about the process. So what I'm going to do is take you sort of like a wham bam mini lesson of one way to demystify the process. And I am going to be using a poem that appears in the book Text Structures from Poetry, but this process can be transferred and applied to any poem that's in the Poetry Out Loud anthology. So what we're going to do is we're going to just act like students here for the next 20 minutes. And I'm hoping that that this is a good time for you to actually act like a student, which means what you see here on the screen, I will always start with some pre-writing. And we are going to do this for, it's just like 2 minutes. And you can see up there on the screen, it says, think of a time someone gave you advice and you wish you had taken it. Tell about that. And we will write for, it says 3 minutes, but we're going to bring it down to 2 since we're only here for a short bit. So think of a time someone gave you advice and you wish you had taken it. Go ahead and free write, no censors. You just finish up your thought, what you're having there. And we're going to move on. We're going to pretend this poem was in the Poetry Out Loud anthology, but A.E. Housman is, just not this particular poem. And I'm going to go ahead and read this poem out loud to you. Typically, we would do this twice, once just out loud. The next time I would ask you all to underline the parts that you like the best, or here, maybe just write them down, or, you know, since we're virtual in this way. So when I read this poem out loud, I would like you to underline in your head which parts you think are interesting to you in one way or another. When I Was 1 and 20 by A.E. Housman. When I was 1 and 20, I heard a wise man say, give crowns and pounds and guineas, but not your heart away. Give pearls away and rubies, but keep your fancy free. But I was 1 and 20, no use to talk to me. When I was 1 and 20, I heard him say again, the heart out of the bosom was never given in vain. 'Tis paid with sighs aplenty and sold for endless rue. And I am 2 and 20, and oh, 'tis true, 'tis true. So, is there one or two parts that you saw that you notice? Just what you notice? I am going to open this up to like discussion for 2 minutes. Is there a part that you notice that you want to just bring to our attention?
Age comes into play. When you're young, you tend not to listen. You have to experience to really learn the lesson.
Yeah, so there's that shift from the tone of like the 21-year-old or the 1 in 20. They're blocking out the advice, but then it shifts to the 2 and 20, and you're a wiser experience. Great. Anything else that you see there that you would notice?
I hope I can mention this or is valid. The first thing that stands out to me is just the way that they say 21 and 22. It's just not a way that we do that anymore, right? It sounds it's interesting to me to notice that.
And everything you notice is valid. Just put that out there. And what, you know, like just the way that that syntax is. We don't talk like that anymore. We don't say 1 in 20. So it gives it a whole different air of the wording, the diction, the way that that's put together. Great. And I saw one more hand go up. Is that?
That was me. I'm sorry. I'm like nerding out over this poem. I think it's kind of comedic. I think the ending is sort of ironic because he only turned from 21 to 22 and he already thinks like, oh, I know now, you know. And I think it's him trying to say like, even though you grow a year older, you're still gonna have something new to learn. Like you might think you know everything now, right? Now that you learned that one lesson that one wise man told you, but there's still gonna be quite a few more.
Yeah, awesome. So tonally, comedic, even in our like 2-minute discussion, just to note, you've got diction, you have syntax, you have tone, you have the shifts. So with your students, I always would have my students drive the discussion, what they notice, and because they often would hit the big things that in my teacher brain, I wanted to hit, right? That I wanted to get to, but it's all driven from their own observation and experiences. So we would have read through this twice and gone to that, but now the part about really demystifying. Again, I sort of apologize for just how fast. I've never done a lesson this fast, but I'm excited that we are. What I would do is ask them to physically chunk their poem. When you're virtual, if they have electronic means to do this. So basically we tease out the structure. So the first chunk here you see, here's advice someone gave me. The second chunk, what I thought about it then. That third chunk, more advice I was given. And then finally, what I think about it now. And as you know, yeah, the wise old 22-year-old from the 21-year-old, but what I think about it now. And you can simplify what this is just the text structure here is a change of attitude. Advice someone gave me, what I thought about it then. More advice I was given, what I think about it now. So you can see from the outset, kids might be thrown off by the language, right? 1 in 20, what, miss, nobody talks like this. But when you really break it down into these chunks, then you're able to show them exactly what this is, that change of attitude. So the next step that I would typically do in a classroom is, you know, that 2-minute write you all did? Well, nobody in my classroom ever starts with a blank page. Everybody's writing and they have something down first. So then we have gone through this process, which is really, this is a 40 to 50 minute lesson when you're taking it the whole, you know, one class period. And so when we reveal the structure this way in these chunks, then I would turn it to the students and say, now for the next 10, 15 minutes, we will write on, you know, you can write, the invitation is to write about your change of attitude or whatever else has sprung up for you. And this can be, honestly, it could be essays or fiction or poetry. You can do this with any genre because the structure is there. And that is like super, super fast how the process works in demystifying the poem. And I'm going to just show you on this last page, which is, by the way, all going to be coming to you. I didn't want to give you this document in advance because I wanted us to experience it in real time. But the nuts and bolts, it's just a 4-step process. So that first step, free write for 3 minutes and set it aside. And here's the prompt for this particular poem. Think of a time you gave. So if you were pulling from the Poetry Out Loud anthology, you would just come up with your own you would see the poem, come up with something you know the students can relate to and start with that free write. You can adapt these 4 steps for any poem anywhere in the world. Second step, read the poem aloud, slowly. Typically, I would read the poem aloud first because sometimes there's words they don't know how to pronounce or they get scared or whatever. So if I read it first, then I might ask a student to read it when I ask everyone to underline. And then you draw out the craft. That's where you're really doing that analysis, all drawn from their observations. But reading it twice out loud. Then revealing that chunked poem. In this book, it's all there, but you as teachers can do this with any poem too. Just you kind of look, it's not like, you know, there's not always a definitive thing. There can be different ways of reading it, but it helps if you can box off chunks of information and reveal what that is with the students. Then you all truly, I read the poem again. After it's chunked up like that, I would read it one more time aloud so they can see what those chunks look like in that real time. That's amazing to read a poem 3 times aloud in one class period. It's super effective because the words, the power of the poem, that repetition of hearing it aloud, poems are meant to be spoken, that it's a really great way to learn. And then finally, that's the invitation to have students write a poem, because look what they already have. A whole page of thoughts before they started. Nobody has a blank page. Examples of craft they like, that they've noticed. A text structure, that's a possibility, or they can write with whatever that has come up in their mind. I don't ever limit them. And then see what they come up with. So in 45 to 50 minutes, we're back to those teaks. And it's like, here's the teaks alignment. And the truth is, with this teaks alignment here for the book, we have a teaks alignment for every single poem in that book. This one's less than 38. So I'd have to go all the way down to 38, which I guess I'm doing. But you can see that there's teaks alignment for every single poem. I'm going to not do that. That's excessive. And that is how you do a 45 to 50 minute lesson where you're hitting all those major strands, from reading aloud critically analyzing. The students are all getting involved with it too in the discussion. And then they're writing original work from it too. So it's through all the stages of that process as well, from brainstorming with their free write to generating their own work, which then can be in another class period brought to revision and finished draft. And, you know, this is that generative process with a mentor text. So they're not just trying to dream up new ideas. So this is one more way that you can put poetry out loud into your lessons, hit all of those teaks, and, you know, you're giving them heady work, because, you know, poetry out loud is, there's contemporary poems, but there's a requirement for a pre-20th century poem in there as well, which was always the kind of like scary part for students. Not all students, but for some, they're like, oh my gosh, miss, I don't know. I'm like, no, actually they're shorter, you know, because they're usually the 25 lines or fewer. But you see, we just dealt with the language of A.E. Housman. And if we would have been here for 50 minutes, we'd be having a really awesome time, because I would have had you all write and share. And, but this is a great way to bring this process, totally break it down nuts and bolts for contemporary work, for pre-20th century work, and bringing real rigor into a classroom. You're sneaking it in on them. They don't even know how much fun they're having. And then they say, we've done a sonnet? Are you kidding? So we have a couple of minutes. Are there questions I can answer for you all?
Yeah, and since we are such a small group, we could just unmute yourself if you have a question for Laura.
I didn't have a question, but there's something else I noticed about the poem that was really exciting.
Yay, tell
You
me.
can hear me?
Yeah.
Because at the end, when they say, I now am 2 and 20, and obviously that's funny because we know, like, you still don't know anything at that age. But like the fact that they're saying, what I learned was they're right, I should never give my heart away. And we know that that's also wrong. So it's like,
Yeah.
It's funny. It's just extra funny. I just caught that second layer after we talked about it.
Yeah. And you know what I love is, like, not even one person started with that rhyme, right? 20, say, guineas away, rubies free, 20, me. Where, like, in my experience, poems that have been beat into kids that they're like, I hate that. It's usually somebody doesn't know what to do and they're scared. And so they start with the most obvious thing, which they're like, what? Oh, it rhymes. And, you know, like, if you really look at what it's saying, the end rhyme is not the first thing we notice. It's not the prevailing feature. Or it's one of them, but that's not where you have to start. So.
Once you broke the poem up into the chunks, we discovered that there was a change of attitude. Is there a different discovery for every poem? Like once you chuck it up, like instead of like,
Yeah.
change of attitude?
Yeah. It can be anything, but like, for instance, in this book, I'm just gonna like throw it up here so you know what I'm talking about. There's this book, it has 50 different lessons in it. Each one of the lessons has a different structure. So, and those structures can be adapted for all kinds of things. So a couple of the other structures, acting on an impulse, what I give to you, a quirky behavior, watching someone do something. So like, if you have a particular thing, you need to write a persuasive essay. There are persuasive poems where there's, you know, rhetorical devices to do these things, that they can be taught through poetry, some of these other kinds of structures and strategies as well. But this particular one was a change of attitude, which we see so much there. And then it really does open it to amazing writing, where teachers who I've done this with before, they write their own, and just the kinds of stories that people, we've all had advice we wish we would have taken. And when you start putting that into your own life and own context, it can be a very moving experience.
That's wonderful.
Can't help but think when I was looking at the poem there, what the stanzas would be when you would have something like when I was 1 in 60, when I was 1 in 70, what that would be like.
Yes, yes. You know, we can laugh about the wise old 22-year-old, but when we start inserting ourselves in there, it changes. So, thank you all for coming. If I can help in any way with nuts and bolts of any of these things, it's really one of my favorite things to do. So please do call on me should you need it. Hopefully this gives you, it's like a super fast way to, but at least you've got the basics of like how this 4-step method can work. And share with your colleagues, because I do feel like sometimes people think poetry is a little bit unapproachable, and you can, it doesn't need to be. So.
I'd like to open it up just for a second here, Anina, if you would like to add anything to our discussion, or also to anything you wanted to say to the teachers who are here right now.
Teachers, we love you. Thank you so much for all of the work that you're doing. We just thought that this session would be not only helpful for generative writing, but giving your students different tools to look at a poem from Poetry Out Loud and figure out how to analyze it. You know, not in terms of looking for patterns from one poem to another, as much as now I have the tools to see what shines to me and what sticks out, and that is how I will focus my memorization and my recitation. So we think it's a really helpful way of, yes, demystifying. So thanks so much, Laura, for doing this, and thanks to you all for joining us.
Sure, my pleasure. Thank you, everyone. I'm thinking about you all teachers all the time out there.